Welcome to ESGX Live, the community for information and education to inspire collaboration and action on all things related to sustainability, with me, Nigel Lake, today in London, and my co-host Paul Herman, who joins us from somewhere in France. 2023 has started off with quite a rush on many fronts. I know for many people working in and around the world of sustainability, there has been a lot of action, most of it or much of it positive, certainly from our perspective. There have been a few quite big news items. One for me was the reports from Bloomberg New Energy Finance on the amount of investment into the energy transition in 2022, which reached 1.1 trillion US dollars. That's the first time we've been above $1 trillion in a single year. Last year was about $750 billion. And perhaps it's not quite enough, but it is very much within what is needed to achieve the energy transition over the time frame that's required. The other thing that I think is really interesting is we have also started to see some beginnings of awareness in the general domain, in the general public domain, of the importance of the transition for our food supply chain to address the ecological damage that is being done by conventional food production. Many people have heard of COP15. Quite a few know that it was in Montreal, and even that is a significant step ahead from last year. But today's episode, we will be hearing soon from Rick Wartzman about his new book, Still Broke. But before that, I will hand to Paul Herman to take us into this month's Green Jobs Report. So, Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Nigel. Delighted to have everybody back together for our ESGX series. Nigel, thanks for helping cover some of the latest news on ESGX. Nigel's up in London. I'm down here in Nice, France. Delighted to have Rick Wartzman with us today, author of the new book, Still Broke, and author of several other books. But we'll get to that in just a few minutes. First, we want to cover the latest in green jobs. I'm taking the role of Amir Khaleghi this week, who is in Chicago. Okay, so let's fire it up, and I will share my screen. The Green Jobs Report is something that we've been doing since right before COVID. So you're going to see a lot of our, as soon as I can get the cursor to work, we're going to see a lot of our, the comparisons from before and after. Just as a quick refresher, the Green Jobs takes sustainability ratings that we create here at HIP Investor, and we overlay them on the Bureau of Labor Statistics data that comes out by sector and by industry. And each of those sectors and industries is rated for the cumulative employment of the companies, public equity companies in those sectors. And that's what generates the green, yellow, or red jobs for sustainable, slightly extractive, or mostly extractive. And most jobs in the US are in this yellow category. There's a handful, about 10%, that are in green, and there's another 10% which are in extractive. So since the beginning of 2020, which is how long we've been doing this report, over that time period now, we've seen the big dip in COVID-related job cuts, which mainly impacted extractive jobs, low-paid, low safety jobs, and then working its way back to today, where we're above the level of jobs that we were in February 2020. And we've sort of converged on the recovery. For the longest time, the green jobs had the fastest recovery, but we've nearly converged on those across all types of sustainability, which, despite the desire to build back better in the economy that the government has espoused, we're building back the same. We're working our way back down to the low sustainability score. So this hipness of the economy is on a 100-point scale. Anything below 50 is net negative. We had a big jump during the initial COVID layoffs by laying off the extractive jobs. But now, as all those have come back, despite low unemployment, we're building the economy back the same, not to be more sustainable. Now, one thing that has remained consistent over time is that the greener industry jobs, the more sustainable characteristics of the companies in those sectors, do pay more. And so some of those are sustainability minded companies, and others are just great companies to work for. Whereas the extractive companies and the slightly extractive companies, the jobs and pay, which we're going to talk about when Rick Wartzman comes on, it's difficult to make a living having those jobs. And some of those are not even full-time jobs. Some of those are part-time or three-quarters time. Now, over, as many of us know, since the early 2010s, the job pay growth, the wage growth, was in the 2.5% to 3% range. During COVID, the wages kicked in to pay people better, including the race for $15 an hour minimum wage, some $20 an hour minimum wage. And during that time period, since the emergence of COVID in the 2020s, the green jobs have grown more. The red jobs have also grown, but not as fast. So this distinction of more sustainable, more extractive has expanded. And then when we plot the unemployment rates of the different sectors, you can see that the economy's unemployment rate is just over 3.5%. In greener industries, it's much lower. In extractive industries, it's much higher. So you would think there would be a policy desire to have more green jobs. We have a little bit of that, Infrastructure and Inflation Reduction Act that's going to tilt towards more greener companies and more sustainability behaviors. But there's still a lot of gravity pulling us back to these extractive and slightly extractive jobs. So that's the quick rundown on the Green Jobs Report. I'll stop the screen share right here. Please feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and also to put them in the Q&A. So I'm going to welcome to the stage Rick Wartzman. Rick and I have known each other for several years now. Rick was a business reporter, business editor, has been called a business historian due to his excellent work in writing, not only writing about business, but also writing books. So Rick's latest book is called Still Broke: Walmart's Remarkable Transformation and the Limits of Socially Conscious Capitalism, which we talk about here all the time on ESGX, socially conscious capitalism and sustainable capitalism. Rick is also the author of other books on, sorry, I'm just pulling up the titles here: The End of Loyalty, The Rise and Fall of Good Jobs in America, Obscene and the Extreme, The Burning and Banning of John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, and The King of California, and the Making of the Secret American Empire. So Rick, delighted to have you with us today. Part of your journey has also been helping lead the Peter Drucker Institute, and now a spin-off called Bendable Labs. So welcome.
Yeah, great to be with you. Great to see you, Paul.
Great. And you are on a mix of book tour and doing work as part of Bendable Labs right now. And so you're in Charlotte, North Carolina today, right?
Yeah, I'm in Raleigh, actually. But
Raleigh. Okay.
Yep.
Sounds good. So, and I'll just prime everybody as you have questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. And if you're watching on YouTube, please put your questions in the chat there. All right. So Rick, how did this book come about? What you write about in the book, of course, how it came about, but just give us a mini version of your journey from moving from reporting on the world in business to taking action in the world of business.
Yeah. No, my kind of history with Walmart goes back pretty a long way at this point. So I was the business editor at the LA Times back in 2003, which somehow is now 20 years ago. That blows my mind. And my team did a really deep dive into really the high human cost of low prices, right? The low prices that Walmart has on their shelves, which has a real benefit and a real social benefit, right? Consumers feel that every time they push a cart right down a Walmart aisle and go to check out and save money. And economists, were at the time in particular widely crediting Walmart with holding down the US inflation rate, right? Holding it down more than it would otherwise have been just because it was so vast. And they, as a company, have long seen that as really the key to their social mission, that they bring high quality goods to regions that might not have them otherwise, to people that otherwise wouldn't have them at very affordable prices. And that is a good thing when we kind of wear our consumer hat. But we also looked at this high human cost and everything from, sort of changing the aesthetics of downtowns and small towns, across America, driving mom and pop businesses out of business, chasing manufacturing to low wage countries overseas and driving US manufacturing offshore, to the way that they, took care, or their lack of care, for their own workers in holding down wages. And there's a long history to that at the company. So we looked at both sides of the ledger, and my team actually went on to win the Pulitzer Prize for national reporting in 2004. Great moment. I continued to follow Walmart through the years. My last book, you mentioned The End of Loyalty, I really held the company up again. The focus wasn't on Walmart, but in the last chapter, I used them as kind of a paradigm of 21st century capitalism, one that had come to really favor shareholders over workers, and in many ways profits over people. And I again kind of held up Walmart as a example, and not in the most favorable light. Flash forward a year, and I was out giving some talks actually about the end of loyalty, and talking about, among other ways, that the social contract between employer and employee in America had eroded, right? Less job security, stagnant pay, eroding retirement and healthcare benefits, all of these things. One of the things that I also looked at was the fall off in employer provided skills training, particularly for frontline workers. And I was talking about the need for that and so on. And lo and behold, there were some Walmart executives at a couple of my talks, and they kind of pulled me aside afterwards. And I had mentioned I was thinking about some things in the workforce development arena, and developing a platform that would help people acquire the skills that they needed to upskill and reskill for new positions in the workplace. And it turned out we had some common ground in that area. And long story short, they ended up funding this project at the Drucker Institute, even though I was astounded, actually, right, as a long time.
You were a critic. You were a critic of Walmart.
Yeah.
You held them to account. The high cost of low prices is a term most of us in sustainability know. So how did it, who approached who about working essentially together, at least funding together? That's a very unique outcome.
Right. So they we started talking, we clearly had a common interest in lifelong learning and workforce development. And I had this idea for a work project. Walmart ended up funding the project along with Google and some other early funders. But Walmart was a significant funder. They ended up, their philanthropic arm, their corporate philanthropy, gave more than $2 million to seed fund this lifelong learning platform, now called Bendable. And we offer this through U.S. public libraries around the country for their patrons. It's a learning kind of discovery and access tool that library patrons can use. And I was astounded, honestly. I thought, man, maybe they're trying to buy me off. They clearly knew who I was, and yet, we got this funding. But it kind of didn't matter. I suddenly had a new window into the company. And what I became convinced of was that there really was something interesting going on at Walmart. They had started to raise wages for the first time really in 2015 as kind of a conscious effort to pull up their starting wage across the company. It was the first time they had done that since their founding in 1962, all the way to 2015. I started meeting people who were clearly dedicated to helping improve things for their frontline workers, treating them better, having them have more stable scheduling, providing more full-time hours, again, raising pay, improving healthcare benefits. They had done quite a bit. And so I approached them and I said, I want to tell this story. I kind of put back my journalist hat on. I was actually at a conference and a Walmart executive I knew happened to be there. And I grabbed her we were watching a hockey game or something at a bar. And I said, hey, I want to tell this story. Do you think you'd help me run this up the flagpole? And I said, this is a chance. I don't think you've been given your due as a company in terms of these investments you've made in your frontline workers. I think a lot of people, particularly on the coast, right, think of Walmart as the evil empire and would never step foot in a Walmart and so on for the way it treats its workers. You've done a lot. I want to tell that story. Why did you come to this? What does it all mean? And then I said, look, I also want to be clear. And I made this clear to the executives I ended up kind of negotiating the ground rules of the book with. I need full access. I need to talk to your executives. I'm going to need to recreate pivotal board meetings. I'm going to need data. I'm going to need access to Doug McMillan, the CEO. And I'm not going to pull any punches. I'm not going to sugarcoat any shortcomings I find. I'm going to talk to all your critics, including all the union folks who are my friends anyway. And I'm going to come to my own truth on this. And if you're okay with that, let me in. I want to tell this story. And the result is this book still broke, which, it took about 2 years of research and a year to write.
Sure. So the title doesn't, if I was on the Walmart side, I might be a little frustrated. So what?
They hate the title. Yeah, for sure.
Right. So what do you think Walmart sees in the book, or what did they think might become of the book to tell their story?
So look, I think they ended up cooperating with me, and they really, by and large, they kept their word, which is to say, look, you always as a journalist want more and more access, but they gave me a lot of access. They gave me a lot of data. They were really cooperative, and so I no complaints. They kept their word, and was particularly difficult. Frankly, a lot of the reporting was through the pandemic, when they were like a little busy, trying to deal with all that from an operational standpoint. And so they were great on that front. I think they did it because I think they really believe they have a good story to tell. And the book, look, it's not, despite the title, it's not a screed against Walmart. And although they hate the title, I have talked to enough, high executives who say, look, the book really, it's truth. And the subtitle, the one part, the Walmart's Remarkable Transformation, I did not compose casually. I think it has been a remarkable transformation given the context of their own history. And so at the same time, the still broke part and the limits of socially conscious capitalism is also a part of the truth I came to, which is, and I can kind of tell you about that. So Walmart, look, at the end of the day, they've continued to raise wages. They've continued to invest in their workers. So in fact, they raised wages again, announced just last week. So where does that take them? So they raised their minimum starting pay from $12 an hour to $14 an hour. In some places that will go to
times a million or a million 0.4 million. They have
1.1 million full-time hourly workers and roughly 500,000 part-time hourly workers. So they've moved much more.
Most of those are in the store. They're cashiers or greeters.
Correct. Not greeters anymore, but cashiers and stockers and, exactly. And some people in distribution centers, as well.
Right. But in like Bentonville, you've been to Bentonville, which is its own little town and metropolitan area, and sort of seems like a high-end suburb now, given how it's grown. But that's less than 100,000 people. Right, 100,000 jobs. Yeah.
Most of it's 1.6 million workers and 1.5 or in the hourly worker ranks. And so look, here's what they've ended up. After all of this, and even after last week, their average wage, is now over. It's $17.50 an hour. It's over $17 an hour. So $17.50 an hour. But what does that mean? So sort of step back. You mentioned, the fight for 15 in your opening, this push for $15 an hour. And I think we are all now trained to reflexively think, ooh, 15, Target now pays 15, Starbucks pays 15, that's good. The fight for 15 began more than a decade ago, launched by the SEIU more than a decade ago. inflation has like gone up a little bit in the last decade. You do
Right.
the math, and 15 isn't so hot. And the truth is 1750 isn't so hot. When
Right.
you actually,
even full time, you
well, that's
multiply
right.
times 2,000 hours. So that's
But
either 30,000 a year or 35,000 a year.
and it's not even that, because here's why. The average full-time worker at Walmart works 36 hours a week. The average part-time worker works 23 hours a week. You do a weighted average, right? And what you find is that 1750 turns into a hair over $29,000 a year in annual pay for full-time and part-time workers. If you throw out the part-timers, because maybe that's, people, some want at least some want to work part-time, and they're students or they're, older people just want some pocket money or whatever. Fine, take the part-timers out. You work full-time at Walmart, the average worker there is still making less than $33,000 a year. And that's still
Are there any
broke,
benefits?
right?
Are there any healthcare
Yeah.
benefits, or like
Yes.
one of the things that was, it's interesting that it's eye-opening. You have been watching this a long time. We did some work with the Retailers Institute, and as we talked to big brand name companies about how to retain workers, one of them was time off. And it seemed to be this revelation that if you allow people time off to take care of family, they would stay. So how does that get worked through? How do those types of components of the job package, compensation package work its way in?
Right. So Walmart has gotten better on healthcare, but here's the problem. It's very typical of a large, low-paying retailer or other low-paying industry, which is to say they offer healthcare to their part-time and full-time workers. But when you make $33,000 a year, you end up, because of the out-of-pocket costs, right? Just to cover what you have to, you can, for your premium and then deductible, you really can't take advantage of the health insurance. So everyone gets health insurance, but whether you can use the health insurance is a different matter, right? And there's some thresholds of being what's called underinsured. And there are, all too many workers who fall into that. We know too that, when you make this little, there are still, and the federal government does not produce full numbers on this. When the GAO last ran a report, they only had numbers of public benefits in, somewhere between like 9 and 14 states, depending on which benefit you looked at. But Walmart still had thousands and thousands of workers just in that limited state sample size on food stamps and Medicaid. And my question, and I've asked this and I ask it in the book, is why is it okay for anybody to get up and go to work and work hard, presumably, and come home and at the end of the day be struggling so much that they have to rely on public assistance to get by? There's something fundamentally broken about that. And that's the thing. Look, the title Still Broke refers to, obviously, that Walmart workers, after their remarkable transformation, are still broke, right? On average, a full-timer is only, making less than $33,000 a year. But the system's broken, right? Both the system the company operates in and our larger system as a society. We have a living wage crisis. We have a wage crisis, in my mind, in this country. Walmart is a source of that problem as the biggest employer in the country, right? It's done a bunch, but it hasn't gone far enough, fast enough. But it is also a symbol of a bigger problem that cuts across many other retailers and food service providers and caregivers and teachers and, on and on, right? Industry after industry. Just folks are really struggling. My estimate in reading all the literature is that somewhere between 25 and 40% of the labor force, so that's 40 million to 65 million people, right, who are working folks. And again, get up, go to work. And then it's not every month, but all too often, their lives are so precarious because they are making such little money that we know by all the surveying, they are faced with terribly painful choices, right? Do I pay rent this month or buy medicine? Do I heat my home or do I put enough food on the table for my kids? I find this unconscionable, honestly. And so that's really ultimately what this book is about.
Right. So what is the transformation? The transformation used to be less great and now is a little better, or because that sounds like incremental, not transformational. So can you just lay out what you think is transformational, what you think is incremental, and what hasn't happened yet?
I think it's incremental. I think it's transformational in the context of Walmart's own history, their business model, the box they play in. You know, again, I admired Doug McMillon for being able to take the ball down the field at all on this. You know, it's again, this is sort of flown in the face of longtime Walmart policy, culture, norms. And so to continue to push on wages as he has is a good thing. But you know, so it's remarkable in that, from that standpoint. And, you know, the subtitle incremental wouldn't sell as well. So,
sure.
But all kidding aside, you know, but you're right. What this has shown me is, as I said, is that no company, look, Walmart's actually trying. And at the end of the day, they're at, you know, less than $33,000 at this point. I'll tell you one to me, very telling anecdote from the book. But why, you know, at the end of the day, what this has shown me is that most companies will not, and there are some exceptions. We know about Costco, PayPal, Bank of America. There's some others that have really gotten in front on wages, but they are the exception. Most companies will not go far enough, fast enough to take care of this crisis and these tens of millions of hardworking people who are really struggling to make ends meet. Sort of to give you a couple data points that might be useful, and then, you know, some ways to think about this. So one is, spoiler alert for the book, so we can go off for 2 minutes if you don't want to hear this part. But when Doug and his management team came in and they first approached the board about raising wages, and there'd been a decade of pressure building up from, you know, external kind of agents who were pushing on Walmart, the unions, our Walmart, now called United for Respect, the labor group that had spun out of the food and commercial workers, the interfaith community, right? The Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility has had a steady dialogue with Walmart and was pushing on them, right? The nuns were all up in their business. Politicians like Bernie Sanders and others, you know, journalists, right? Pains with a pen like me, who were, you know, all on them about this. And then business operation reasons. What really turned things around was they had kind of driven labor costs down so low, and had not raised wages for so long, and their workers were struggling so much, their turnover was just ratcheting up and up. As a result, customer satisfaction was declining, customer service was declining, store shelves were bare, stores were dirty. They were losing customers. Same store sales were declining quarter after quarter after quarter. So really, at the end of the day, despite all the external pressure and some internal change agents who had come in and were trying, it was really business operations that Doug was like, we got to do something. And they did. So after all of that, he goes and his team goes to the board. This was in 2015, early 2015. The average starting wage at the time was $7.65. So a hair over the federal minimum wage. Okay. Again, the minimum now is $14. They just announced. So they've gone quite a bit from $7.65 to now a minimum of $14. So again, much credit, great. But their original proposal, that first lift, the board pushed them ultimately in a two-step process to $10. In 2015, they went to 9, and then 2016, they went to 10. But management's initial proposal was from $7.65 to $8.25. And it was the board that actually pushed things higher. And I looked at that and I said, man, that tells you a lot about how slow companies are. I mean, some things, look, the corporate world is changing unbelievably quickly with technology and all the, you know, the pace of change. But when it comes to things like raising wages, man, they move slow. and it's really hard to get them to move.
Yeah, no, this is, I think this is a core, I mean, what would be very powerful in any business education is people think of it as cost of labor, not value of labor. Yet many
Yeah,
CEOs say people are our most important asset, yet people are not an asset on the balance sheet.
right.
And so they're an asset when you maybe subtract book value from market value of the company. There's implied intangible value, specifically people is one of those components. So yes, this cost of labor versus the value of labor or the return on investment in labor. Okay, so
Can
want to cover two
can I say one other, two other quick points, one which I think are important for this audience. Then I see Rose has a really good question. So,
yes.
So one point I want to make is, you know, as Walmart has changed its posture, and again, gone from 765 to a minimum of 14 now, you know, in some eyes, right, it's sort of like the fight for 15. They got to 15. We won the fight. Like, no, again, this is not a living wage. This is their people are still really struggling. And yet, you know, they make Fortune's Change the World list. And I love Fortune, and Alan Murray is a friend of mine who runs Fortune, and you know, and has written the book about, right, you know, companies that are changing the world. But again, I think this gives them a pass, right? You have folks like, you know, at Calvert Research and Management talking about how Walmart's gone from being part of the problem to part of the solution. Boston Globe columnists, you know, hailing Walmart's, you know, great efforts. I actually think this makes it harder to keep pushing because they feel like, great, we got, you know, we're almost at 15, we're at 14 an hour. 15 is the fight for 15. We're all like, again, it's not enough. It's too slow. It's not a living wage. And I think that it can be counterproductive to then hail these incremental steps as solutions, because they're not. The other point I want to make is, and I think really important for your audience is, you know, does this mean Walmart's hypocrites? Are they? And I don't think they are. I think that's a company that, like many, they drink a lot of their own Kool-Aid, but they do want to embrace ESG. They want to embrace, they're big proponents of shared value. And indeed, Michael Porter holds them up as a great proponent and you know, exemplar of shared value, a lot on the E front, but increasingly he would tell you on the S front, because they're doing all this stuff. And so, you know, is that a lie? Is that the truth? Well, here's the way I look at it, right? They've invested, or they did, from 2015, that first pay raise, up until the end of 2021, when I sort of stopped reporting. They had invested $5 to $6 billion in higher wages and other investments, more full-time workers, invested a lot in training and so on. All great. $5 to $6 billion, that's real, right? No doubt, that's real. So does that mean, you know, they embrace stakeholder capitalism? Yeah, I guess $5 to $6 billion worth. Does that mean shareholder primacy is dead? Well, over that same period, they bought back $43 billion worth of their stock. So I'm a journalist. I just follow the money, and I'm like, both things can be true. They can embrace stakeholder capitalism to this degree, and they can also, doesn't mean shareholder primacy is dead.
Right. And one of your contributions to that is the Wall Street Journal Management 250 that you did with the Peter Drucker Institute, and the links in the chat for everybody. And Walmart ends up at number 23, but with some, you know,
with a red flag on employee engagement and development. Yeah.
Yeah. What is that red flag for? What's the...
That means they're in the bottom 25% of all their scores, in the bottom 25% of all the companies that we looked at. And I think it was 800 and I can't remember, 800 and some, between 850 and 900 last year.
Right. So, yeah, so that, because I bring this up where Walmart, like I've worked inside Walmart. I was actually part of that Blue Sky team with a dozen different organizations from NRDC and the like. I had written a Fast Company article that, Walmart showed some
I did
gaps.
not know that. Wow.
Gaps, yes. And I went back and forth to Bentonville several times. And at the time, while we had proposed like the full solution that you're, advocating for was to do things for people and the planet. At the time, they went for all the things on the planet because there was a harder return on investment, like there was a more certain. And at the time in 2007, the people one, they still weren't committed to. So when did the switch go on for that the people would have a significant return on investment? Is it just these external pressures like Rose has put in the chat, or was there some other elimination?
No, I think it was really these business pressures, which started really around 2013 or so. There are a couple, to me, incredible anecdotes in the book. Most of them told to me by a woman who's still a senior Walmart executive, has changed roles. She was COO of the U.S. operations then, named Judith McKenna. And you may remember, upon reading the book, she walks into one store, I believe may have been in North Carolina or South Carolina, in one of the Carolinas, I believe. And the turnover in that store she realized, was 400%. And
which means everybody quits every quarter.
Yes.
That's what 400%.
Yeah, that's what that means. Right. I mean, it's just, right. Like you have 4 people in this position every year. Like, how do you run your store? And the manager, according to her, said, look, I do the best I can. She went into a store in New Mexico, and she looked down and she asked a colleague, "Oh, when did we start using brown floor tiles?" And he said, "Those aren't floor tiles, that's dirt." And she just realized nobody cared. It was just, that was not an aberration, right? Nobody cares. And so they were really, I think, in danger of running the company into the ground. Doug came in 2014, recognized this. And again, that's when he said, look, we've got to make some investments. Now, his proposal was to $8.25 an hour, but to his credit, I think realized that there had to be some investments, and they would tell you that there has been a return on investment. They won't tell me exactly what their turnover has gone from to, but I heard it was as high as 200% before they started making these changes. And, if they're at the retail industry average of, I've seen different reports, 75% or something, it's still incredibly high, but it's costing them a lot less than 200%.
Nigel, you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to come back to, I think you gave the great example of how, some money has been directed to employees, but far more has gone to shareholders over time. And that to me feels like, one of the big picture conclusions from the whole of the US economy, which is going back over quite a number of decades. Almost all the benefits of productivity gains have gone to shareholders, and
yes,
hardly any have gone to employees. Can that change in the US? And are there countries you look at elsewhere where, there are obviously examples that have done really well in sharing the benefits from the beginning, but are there any that have made the shift from directing everything to the shareholders versus actually trying to strike some different balance?
Yeah, I'm not sure any other country's gotten as out of whack in that way as we are here, and certainly some, unfortunately, have come to emulate, to me, the worst of shareholder primacy, right, in other countries. But it's still, you look at all the metrics in developed countries. I mean, the U.S. is really lags in terms of how labor is treated and compensated. And the voice it has, right, which is also very related to that. And we see this now playing out in all kinds of union struggles, and some major companies. I think, look, the whole thing, what the book really taught me, the end of loyalty. I've always been a both end person. And I've always believed, right, government has a role and business has a role into getting workers to share in prosperity as they should, to have their share of the pie, whether you measure it by total economic output or productivity. Clearly, over the last 50 years, workers have not gotten their fair and rightful share, and both institutions, business and government, have a role to play. But in the end of loyalty, I definitely leaned more on it's up to business to restore this social contract as it had more after World War II and the 3 decades after World War II in the US. My dive into Walmart really caused me to reconsider, because I honestly came away not thinking, oh, Walmart is all about PR and this is spin and they're not really trying or doing. Was like, wow, this is what a big low-paying employer that's actually trying looks like. And they still leave their workers, still broke. That suggests to me that we need really a mandated government living wage. I call in the book for a host of reforms around labor law and health, universal health coverage and all kinds of things. But, at the end of the day, just say, look, we need a government mandated living wage. To me, right now, that's $20 an hour. That's based on data from Living Wage for Us, a group you may know of that spun out of Oxfam America. Michelle Murray's doing some incredible work around this with data from the Economic Policy Institute kind of underlying her model. Uh-huh. I love it because, frankly, unlike the MIT Living Wage calculator, it doesn't give a whole bunch of numbers. If you're this size family or you're a single person or you have this many dependents, it's just one number. It's what a family sustaining, what a family living wage is. And it's based on the typical size working family in the US. Here's how much those adults in that family would need to earn to take care of the typical working family, given the hours that those two adults would work in a typical working family. And 80% of Americans live in a county where the family living wage is $20 an hour or higher. 40% live in a county where it's $25 an hour or higher. That's not shocking. Those aren't lavish lifestyles we're talking about. It's, a little over $40,000 a year if you have full-time hours.
All right, so let's talk about solutions. You started a technology consulting research firm for economic stability, mobility, opportunity. It spun out of the Peter Drucker Institute, where we just showed you the Drucker Institute ratings and the other work that Drucker has done. That Drucker work was funded by a couple $1 million from Walmart, a couple $1 million from Google, some other funders. So what is Bendable? How does it work? And how will it bring solutions? And how might it bring other levers along?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Bendable, if you go to bendable.com, you can actually poke around and see the learning platform, workforce development platform that we offer, again, through U.S. public libraries. We have a partnership with a company called Baker and Taylor, which is a big public library products company. They're our sales channel partner. So they're the ones who actually know how to sell something like me. And they sell Bendable to libraries across the country. That work has taken us into the workforce development space. So we have a program now we're piloting in North San Diego County. There's a 5-city region there through the Carlsbad City Library. And the way that works, people who are unemployed, way underemployed, or even out of the labor market can come in and take 15 hours of job readiness training. And then through our partners at Lightcast, the labor market data company, and their community division, they get a guaranteed job interview if they complete the 15 hours of job readiness training. They get a guaranteed interview with a local employer. And we're starting to learn a lot on how to get these folks who are really struggling, placed into jobs. The other piece that I have worked on and did some work recently about to have a report published through the Families and Workers Fund is really the job quality side. And so while Bendable Labs and Bendable is a learning platform, one thing we are very, and you'll see when our real website goes up in a few weeks, we have kind of a what we believe statement. And what we believe is that, learning is really important, and that people who acquire new skills should be rewarded, and certainly everyone should have the opportunity to learn, and in all kinds of settings and ways, and that different pathways are appropriate. And it's really about acquiring skills, not necessarily credentials, and all of those things.
Mhm.
But I also think corporate America has now way over indexed on the learning side, which is to say companies like Walmart and Amazon and others say, look, we offer free education benefits and all this training. And what they're really saying is, it's up to you. Like, you can get to a living wage. All you got to do is get trained in the stuff we want, and and then you'll get there. And I think that's terrible. I think people should be trained, and the more skills they get, and if they're useful skills, they should be rewarded, and that's great, and it will help them. I'm in the lifelong learning and training business, but I think every job should be a good job. Every job should be a quality job. And if someone says, I really just want to be a cashier, why shouldn't that job pay a living wage if that person gets up and goes to work every day? So we need both, right? We need both to create pathways, but we also just need to raise the floor a lot more. And I think the one comes at the expense of the other sometimes.
Yeah, one of this element happened in Georgia, actually, in 2008, 2009, after the global financial crisis. The state of Georgia actually covered, I forget if it was half or all or 80% of the job retraining. And it worked. It moved people, but it was not renewed due to the legislature not renewing it for whatever reason about cost. So they had a program that worked. Yeah. It was government influenced and government subsidized, and then it wasn't renewed and didn't continue. So those are some of the frustrating problems. Nigel, you had another insider question.
Yeah, I was going to dig into that a bit further because you've talked about Walmart, and maybe there aren't greeters anymore. More and more of cashiers in many places in retail have been automated. There are many other areas where automation is coming. Perhaps it will come to driverless trucks, although maybe not as soon as we thought. So you have this constant erosion of those base level jobs, what I think Andrew Yang talked about in his book, The War on Normal People, which is a pretty good enunciation for me of some of the challenges. How on earth and where on earth can we create the new jobs that will be, have some essential human element that people can do, because the erosion of existing jobs presumably will continue for some way yet.
I think so. I'm not a I'm not a big believer in that narrative, I guess. Just my own take is that there's lots of really useful stuff to do that obviously some jobs become obsolete over time. We can all, look at buggy whip makers or whatever. And we know those stories, but sometimes things surprise us, right? Like the story of, ATMs, and now they're more bank tellers because, right. There's things break in unexpected ways. New roles are created. Walmart's still growing its workforce. It's not shrinking, even though it's introduced all kinds of technology. There could come a time when the workforce shrinks some. I don't think it'll be tremendously. And I think there are also so many jobs that are essentially just human to human, like caregiving and like teaching, where we way underpay people. And so, again, this wage crisis afflicts, industries where I don't see robots replacing anybody. And those are people who should be making a lot more. I see a couple questions in the chat. Do you want me to hit those?
Yeah, so one is about Bendable, and that the partnership with libraries sounds very compelling. So this is from Rose Yee.
Yep.
Are there latest metrics on this uptake? It could be pilots, It could be networks.
Yeah, so our first city where we have the most data is in South Bend, Indiana. So that was the first Bendable city through the St. Joseph County.
Pete Buttigieg?
He was really, actually was the mayor at the time, and he was very helpful in, actually, I will give Pete total credit. I met with him, and I then wasn't even called Bendable. I just had this idea, what if we brought a lot of high quality learning resources to one community? Could we create a community of continuous learning, and what would that mean? And it was just sort of this thing rattling around in my head. And we had done some other work with Pete, and I had lunch with him and was kicking this around. And he said, this sounds great. You should go talk to the library. And I kind of looked at him and I said, I thought you were maybe interested in doing this. He said, I am. I'll be supportive. He literally said, he goes, mayors come and go. Who knew at that time where he'd go? But he said, mayors come and go, and administrations change priorities. He said, go to library. They're the most trusted public institution everywhere. They're warm and welcoming to everybody. Lifelong learning is their mission, and they're not going anywhere. And so we did, like Pete really pointed us in the direction of libraries, and I've learned so much about them. They're amazing centers of community. The equity and access they provide is tremendous. So we've had more than 20,000 unique local visitors come to the Bendable platform in South Bend. I should know, it's probably, I don't know, I could look, 7,000, I'm guessing, some 7,500, times that people have gone off our platform to access learning content from somebody else. This is basically we launched in June of 2020. So how long ago was that? Whatever that was, 2.5 years ago.
It'll be 2.5 years. It'll be 3 years.
So that in that time, we've seen some people get through Bendable, and again, the content is mostly free because it's coming from through the public library that pays for course seats from providers like CELED and Penn Foster and LinkedIn Learning and so on. So people access the content. Ours makes the discovery easy. So it's been really exciting. We've had partnerships, and the libraries forged partnerships with, great example, United Way. The community needed more caregivers, actually, who were like professionally certified caregivers for, young kids. And we ran a whole certification program through the Bendable platform that United Way offered, and they were able to increase the number of certified caregivers in the community. So there's some really innovative ways that we're leaning into the platform, and now we are in the state of Maine. We launched Bendable Maine last summer, and through the Maine State Library, and we have we're across the entire state. We've already had, we're over 12,000 unique local visitors in Maine. It's, a whole state. So that's growing quickly. And we're doing some great work there with the Department of Labor, for example. Every career center, there are, I think, 13 of them across the state of Maine. Every one of them now has Bendable on their computers, on the homepage of their computers, and their staff is now, being trained so that when clients come in and need job help, to acquire new skills or learn about different resources, and it's available on Bendable, their staff knows how to access that and get them going on the platform. So lots of different applications.
Right. And so it sounds like Bendable brings together different skill building platforms, providers.
Yeah, we're the marketplace. We're a learning marketplace. Yep.
Right.
And we're wired. We have the plumbing and wiring done with edX and Coursera and LinkedIn Learning and Penn Foster and CELED and Skillshare and a whole bunch of them.
And then who does the matching or the customization? Does that happen? Does that not happen? It's self-discovery?
Yeah, it is. So one of the things you can do, it depends, right? So in some cases, again, they're community organizations. That one of the things you can do on Bendable is, if, say, you run a company or you run a nonprofit and you want to curate content, a selection of courses for those you serve, your employees or your clients, you can create what's called a Bendable board and have like 4 or 5 or as many as you want courses listed there that you've picked, and then direct your folks to that board to take those courses. So again, it's really a kind of organization and curation tool. And we have lots of organizations, dozens of them in South Bend that take advantage of that, which is cool.
Okay. And if somebody listening to this right now wanted to do it, how do they do it? Is it free? Is there a fee?
Yeah, so it costs the library money, or a sponsor, in the community. But yeah, there's, again, we sell it through Baker and Taylor. But if anybody is interested, I'm gonna put my email in the chat, and you can always reach out. And if you want to learn about any of this stuff,
sounds great.
Feel free. So it's just rick@bendablelabs.com, and you can hit me up.
Great. Okay. So we're coming to the end of our hour. So we've covered the book, Still Broke. It's available in hardcover, ebook, audiobook on multiple platforms. There's Bendable Labs to take action to help educate the community, build up skills and jobs. You've created the Wall Street Journal, been part of creating the Wall Street Journal annual, I think it's 7th annual now, Management 250 with the Peter Drucker Institute. Any other levers that we should pull? We talked about like government policy before. You have any secrets on how to lever besides having lunch with the mayor?
I don't know. I wish I did. Again, I at the end of the day, I look, it's easy, especially now. I mean, we could barely, you're sitting in France blissfully, but back here, Paul, we could barely even elect a Speaker of the House, So like, it doesn't seem, I'm not holding my breath that we're going to get to a $20 an hour living wage out of Washington anytime soon. And, the federal minimum wage, right, is still stuck at $7.25 an hour, where it's been since 2009. It's appalling.
Right.
But I
will
think
say there's some activism here. Today was the second day already this year, where 10 days ago, 1 million people protested across France. And today, I don't know what the exact count is, but the pressure to increase the retirement age. And so there is, there's a sense of citizen activism here that takes place. Like in the US, the Million Moms, of course, is one. Obviously protests for racial equity. So does it take like an extreme event to get people to be active, or is there some other method besides in addition to self-improvement, is there some other group method to exert this?
Look, I think having now really dived into this area around living wages, I think there is a political opportunity here. I'm not a politician, so it's easy for me to say. But, and clearly, look, there are, whether it's Bernie Sanders or, we kind of know who've made this an issue. But I think, look, every minimum wage, increase that's been proposed, that's come on the ballot, no matter what state, has always passed. I don't think any of them have failed. And this includes in red states like Florida, right, that have passed minimum wage increases. What that tells me is people know that working folks in this country are not getting a fair shake. They're not making enough to get by, and something's wrong. And again, this is both in red and blue states. Polling from Just Capital suggests that, a living wage is an issue that plays well with everybody. High percentages, right? Huge majorities of not only Democrats, but independents and Republicans. And so I feel like this is a political issue we're waiting for somebody to seize it. And I don't know who that leader is going to be, but I feel like this country is ripe for an honest, real conversation about what a living wage is, what it would mean in this day and age. Again, we're long past $15. And I'd love to see that happen. And look, my hope of hopes, without hopefully having delusions of grandeur, is that, this book might be, part of a way to stimulate that conversation along with many others.
Great. Rick, thanks for all of your expertise through your whole life to bring truth and honesty, to have people reveal themselves through your reporting and your Pulitzer Prize winning work, through your work at the Peter Drucker Institute to bring more systematic innovation, but also employee engagement and support. And now Bendable Labs to have the platforms for the community. It's really inspiring. So everybody go get the book. Just like Stephen Colbert says, let's give it the Colbert bump and give it the ESGX bump for a hardcover, ebook, or audiobook. Thanks, Rick, for being with us. Really appreciate it. And Nigel, over to you to close.
Well, just to add my thanks, very thought-provoking, certainly as someone who spends his life spread across a variety of different countries. The ordinary American's life is so far behind what most people in the first world have as ordinary lives in other countries. People in France may be protesting. They have a healthcare system that everybody has access to. It doesn't matter who you are. Not something you have in America. So I think this building awareness and somehow encouraging people that they need to go out and get active because it's not going to be brought to them is incredibly important. So thank you for all your work. And this is something that everybody has to leave into, because without that, there will not be change. The other thing is, who will exploit this? It is that if we already have significant increases in social tension, that creates all sorts of risks for society as well as opportunities. So I think we all must be here campaigning for good leaders who come to bring positive change, because the other sort of change is also possible in that environment. Looking ahead to next month, Paul, do you want to give a quick intro to what we've got coming up next month with Culture Shift?
Yes, with Culture Shift, with Dr. Mark Sardi of Rollins College, and soon to be MBA, currently MBA candidate, Matej Susek. They have done the academic research and published a paper that looks at cultural preferences in countries around the world and how that lines up or doesn't with ESG and with financial performance. So they're going to be here to talk about that live on ESGX. We hope you'll join us. And we'll continue to focus on the most critical issues to solve the crises of our time with a sustainable approach for people, for planet, and for trust. Thanks, Nick Gower, our producer, to my co-host Nigel Lake in London. I'm Paul Herman in France, and Rick Wartzman, thanks for coming to us from your book tour and all the great work that you do. We'll see you next time on ESGX.